What's up, everybody? Welcome back into an episode of The Lawyer You Know. And today we are going to be breaking down this interview done by Corey Richins' defense team. I haven't heard a lot of people talking about this interview. And when I first saw it, I was like, whoa, why isn't anybody talking about this? I'm kind of shocked at the stuff that they're saying, number one. Number two, what does it really mean? What are they trying to accomplish by this? And number three, are they worried about some potential backlash from the court? Because the judge in this case does not seem to like attorneys turning to the media and using the media as part of the prosecution or the defense. Now, obviously, there's been a lot of eyes on this case. There's been a lot of reporting on this case. There's a lot of feeling on this case. And there's a lot of people in the community that have really strong feelings about the Corey Richins case. But is this what you do to combat that? Was this appropriate? We're going to talk a little bit more about the rules that we've broken down in other cases as to whether or not attorneys are even allowed to do this while they're actively participating in litigation. Of course, I'm going to answer all your questions as well, as long as you hit that like button and or subscribe to the page. Let's get to it. So this interview is one that happens from time to time in these types of cases, right? Because you have all sorts of interviews that we've broken down in the past from attorneys, whether they call in, whether it's a Zoom call with a podcaster, a YouTuber, a court TV type, whether they go to the studio at some news station, whether it's a local news station or a national news station, mainstream media type. This is one set up where, I don't know, they all gathered in some spot. It could be an office. It could be at the news station. I don't know. It looks like some kind of living room setup that they're going to talk about, but it was obviously planned. It was targeted. It was something where the defense team reached out to the news station and wanted to respond. And that's the really important connection to all of this, okay? And this defense team actually talks about in the interview, which I give them credit for. They said, we felt like the prosecution and others are putting these narratives out there. And so we had to respond with truth. And if you remember the rules of professional responsibility for attorneys, they can't go out on the offensive. They can't go pushing false narratives. They can't go talk about evidence that's going to be in the case or comment on the guilt of the defendant. But if information gets out there that is prejudicial to your client, that is not from you or your client, the rules do say you are allowed to respond. And that's exactly what they did here. They are responding. Now, there are some parts of this that are a little bit strange and a little bit you got to read between the lines. But generally speaking, I think they did their best to stay within the rules of professional responsibility when it came to responding to prejudicial information that is material that was put out into the world from someone other than their client and their team. So let's take a listen to this.
In an unprecedented move,
we were willing to take an unusual step of coming forward.
Look, I never thought I would be sitting here.
Corey Richins' attorneys
She is distraught. She is heartbroken.
reached out to 2 News Investigates
That's exactly why we came here. And really, it's an ethical duty.
We have a lot of confidence in you.
to set the record straight.
One thing that's been reported on that they have let go, have not corrected.
If their goal is justice, they have not lived up to it, at least in this case.
A 2 News exclusive.
And I feel that when I see these narratives come out, it becomes a game. It becomes another line. And we forget that there's somebody on the end of that. And that's a client. That's a human. That's a mother.
A Camas mom charged with murdering her husband.
The narrative is that your client is the Moscow Mule murderer. Is that accurate?
A narrative of alcohol, drugs, and greed.
There are certain things that are out there that we know right now, sitting here today, just aren't accurate.
And her attorney.
Certain things that are out there. Okay. So certain things that are out there. That's where it starts to get fishy. Is like, how did this information get disseminated? And thank you for gifting a Lawyer You Know membership. Carmen, I believe her lawyers are court-appointed lawyers, because I think she had a private lawyer and then that private lawyer was out and now these are court-appointed lawyers. So yeah, a lot of this is, there's going to be some semantics to this and some technicalities where, how did this information get out there? And when is it appropriate for an attorney to come and respond to just a media narrative versus if it's something a witness or a prosecutor or a cop actually says, right? That's another big question here. Holly, thank you so much for gifting 5 Lawyer You Know memberships.
They say false information.
I do think the prosecution has declined to correct false information that has come out in the media, and we've waited and hoped that that would occur, and it never has.
Tonight, Richins attorney
Prosecutors have failed to come out and correct false media narratives. Is it the job of a prosecutor? Is it the job of a prosecutor to come out and correct false media narratives? That's a question that we're going to discuss today as well.
speak out only to 2 News investigates.
That's a very, very different narrative.
Camas, Utah, a small town in Summit County with about 2,000 residents. Among them, Corey and Eric Richins and their 3 boys.
Their family was so beautiful. Everything was picture perfect.
Linda King used to work with Corey Richins at Home Depot and remembered Eric, who was a contractor coming into the store.
You can never forget his laugh. And I love that laugh so much.
Linda says she encouraged Eric to ask Corey out after she caught his eye.
I says, go over there and check out with her, so they did. Anyway, they ended up having a date. From then on, they were like glued to each other. It was perfect, I thought.
So like this stuff, right, mixed in the middle is definitely feels like this news station is working together with this legal team to try and present the story a certain way, right? To present the story a certain way that may be different than it's been presented in the past. And when it comes to dealing with negative publicity and things that are falsely out there in the public, most rules of professional conduct say a lawyer can come out and combat that, which is what Corey Richins' team, I almost said Lori Vallow, what Corey Richins' team is doing here. But it does say they can. It doesn't say you must come out and correct a false narrative. And if you're a prosecutor and you're looking at this and you're hearing them talk about it and putting the onus on you to come out and correct the record and make sure if somebody says it was, the fentanyl was in a Moscow Mule and it wasn't in a Moscow Mule, or you don't know if it was, you come out and you say that. The problem is, if you were to expand on your opinion of what you think the evidence shows, you may say something that is actually prejudicial, that is actually material, that could actually poison a jury pool, which you are absolutely prohibited from doing as a prosecutor. So to come out and speak against what the defense believes to be false narratives would be almost impossible for prosecutors to limit it so much so that nothing they said could also be complained of as being prejudicial and inappropriate per the rules of professional conduct. So that's what makes it so difficult. And also you'll see here, the defense team really wants this to feel like they're coming out on the defensive, but in reality, it feels more like they're coming out on the offensive. And we've seen this happen in other cases, right? We've seen defense attorneys and civil attorneys come out and publicly say and do a lot of things, whether it's Karen Reed, Luigi Mangione, P. Diddy, whatever, YSL lawyers. Just there's a lot going on in today's day and age in the media, whether it's podcasts, social media, Twitter, Instagram, local news, mainstream media, whatever it may be. It feels more like it's in that vein to me than the prosecutor said something and we had no choice but to come out and respond.
Perfect until March 4th, 2022, when Eric was found dead inside the couple's home. Police originally ruled that there was no foul play in Eric's death from fentanyl. Then a year and 2 months later, things changed. On May 8th, 2023, Corey was charged with her husband's murder. Prosecutors have added additional counts of financial crimes as well. As of today, Corey's charged with aggravated murder, attempted criminal homicide, 2 counts of insurance fraud, and forgery.
Wendy Lewis, and I am lead counsel in the Corey Richins case.
Kathy Nestor, I am one of the attorneys on the Corey Richins case.
Alexander Ramos, co-counsel on the Corey Richins case.
Wendy Lewis, Kathy Nestor, and Alex Ramos took over as Richins attorneys in May of 2024 after her previous attorney declared a conflict in the case.
What we came in here today were to focus on 4 very serious areas that have been absolutely factually reported incorrectly and that have been discussed publicly in court, in open court. I do think the prosecution has declined.
Okay, so that's different, right? Certain things discussed publicly in open court. Those are always fair game for people to talk about. That's a lot of what people talk about on their podcasts and YouTube channels and break it down. That's where most of the reliable information can come from, right? That's my favorite place to get information, is from the hearing itself and from the words and mouths of lawyers themselves, right? Because they're speaking on their client's behalf, whether it's the prosecutor and the people of that state or a defense attorney. So when we're looking at how all this works, they are going to point to some things that were publicly said in open court. And that, to me, makes a difference.
To correct false information that has come out in the media, and we've waited and hoped that that would occur, and it never has. And so that is why now, at this moment, at this time, we're coming forward and saying, well, then we're going to correct it. So that's where we are, and that's why we're here.
First up,
The narrative is that your client
So this is how they've chosen to do it, which is also interesting, because to me, if this were me and I felt like I needed to correct it, I probably would have done a longer form question and answer podcast, YouTube type of scenario versus something that feels so produced, right? It feels so cut up with explanations and B-roll and pictures of the house and specifically talking about the entirety of the background of the case as if somebody's never heard about the case. I think people that would be more interested in really digging into what they're saying and pulling up what I would have liked to have seen, okay? Which I think, the true crime podcasters and I'm not talking about myself at all, okay? Because, this is not really my forte to like put all the B-roll and all this stuff together, right? But if you had somebody that would have cut out and as I'm thinking about this, like my team obviously could do this very well. They're very good at it. I'm not. But to cut out the parts in court that they specifically have a problem with, as opposed to just saying things came out in court and saying a prosecutor said something, actually cut to those court clips, let us see those court clips, and then respond to what the prosecutor said. To me, that's the easiest way to make sure you're staying within the rules of professional responsibility for lawyers. That's the easiest way to stick to the facts, to respond to what's necessary and prejudicial. That would have been a better format to me than like going on the, old school local TV station where, a couple thousand people maybe watch versus the people that are really invested in justice, in the presumption of innocence and making sure people get their fair shake in court. Like, to me, that really would have been a better avenue if they had a consultant giving them advice. That would have been a better avenue, in my opinion. Also, usually, I don't know how their office works. I don't know if they're public defenders or if they're privately appointed by the judge, but a lot of public defenders' offices won't let you do this because they're also, run by the government and they have red tape that they have to go through. If you're an appointed private attorney, then, it's just like any other private attorney. You're just on a court-appointed list. But that would be interesting to see like how much harder this would be for a public defender to do something like this versus a private lawyer. Lesko, this is just mean. So it's just uncalled for and mean. It said, and FSU has failed to stop a 3-game losing streak. That stops this week. Tomorrow in California, very late at night. Our 3-game losing streak will end.
is the Moscow Mule murderer. Is that accurate? Can you confirm what the murder weapon is?
I can't confirm what the murder weapon is because the prosecution has never told us their theory.
Do we know it actually is a murder?
They have never said that it was given in a Moscow Mule, that fentanyl was distributed or in a Moscow Mule.
Which again, if the prosecutors never said that, and that's what the reports are, it's like can you really blame the prosecutor? Number one. Number two, maybe you can, But then the other question is, a lot of defense attorneys, myself included, will make arguments, but something that is appropriate for jurors when we're in trial to take into account when they're looking at all the evidence presented. You can take in reasonable inferences from the evidence. And I'm just giving this as an example, right? If perhaps there is some type of evidence that she got her hands on fentanyl one way or the other. There's some evidence that in the past, maybe he had eaten or drank something that had caused him some kind of concern and maybe said to somebody, hey, this feels weird. Did she put this in my food? Did she put this in my drink? And then maybe the cause of death being fentanyl poisoning, them thinking she followed her prior MO of putting something in his food, putting something in his drink, and he was telling somebody he didn't feel good. What, right. There's just all sorts of ways. And I'm not saying that's going to be the evidence in this case. We're going to wait and see how the evidence develops at trial. But there are ways to circumstantially present a case where jurors can make reasonable inferences based on the evidence. So for a prosecutor to come out and say, absolutely, it wasn't a Moscow Mule, what if they don't know that either? There's all sorts of things at play when it comes to coming out and correcting a false narrative or something that defense attorneys believe to be a false narrative, which I think happens all the time, where I think the prosecutors are promoting a false narrative or even go to trial on a false narrative, but it's difficult to say they need to come out and correct something I think is a false narrative.
During the preliminary hearing, their lead detective was on the stand, and I asked him the question, sitting here today, do you know how Corey Richins administered fentanyl to Eric Richins? And he said, no. The prosecution has never said that it was in a Moscow Mule.
And that's really great, cross. And you know what else it is? And I'm not saying the defense attorneys are doing this, but to bring this up as a false narrative and be able to present that to the media for all of us to see and watch, I think that's a pretty good argument, right? Makes you think for all of us watching who some people think this is a really easy cut and dry case. Seems like a lot of evidence. And this attorney is starting to plant some seeds of doubt potentially on these questions you may believe publicly have been answered, have not been answered. So this is not an open and shut case. And I hope the jury doesn't walk in there knowing she's guilty before they even hear one piece of evidence.
That came up because there was discussions, and I believe a statement by Ms. Richins early on, that she and her husband had drank a Moscow Mule before dinner. So that was something that was just grabbed onto. It's sexy, it's interesting, the Moscow Mule murderer. But the prosecution has never said that that is their theory of the case, not once. I still, sitting here today, don't really know how they're going to claim that Eric Richins ingested fentanyl.
Does the prosecution have an obligation to correct the record, the public record of this?
I mean, it's the prosecution's job to bring justice. That's what you do as a prosecutor. As a defense attorney, you protect your client's right. A prosecutor needs to find justice, fight for justice. And I believe by not correcting the record, by letting falsities sit out there, that's not what is happening now.
So this is where I think they kind of go a step too far, being this general. If there was one specific thing a prosecutor said or didn't say, or came out that a prosecutor said and they didn't correct, I think you'd have a better conversation. Again, I think more open dialogue back and forth with this attorney would be better than just making that statement. Because imagine if prosecutors in every single case that ever was reported on, that somebody came up and said something that was wrong, if they had to come out and make a public statement saying that that was wrong. What if it was the opposite, right? What if somebody's like, Corey Richins was out of state that day, and the media starts running with that? It can't be Corey Richins. She was out of the state that day. And they were like, no, she was in the state that day. Or somebody says, Corey Richins could not have physically done this. And the state comes out and says, oh yes, she could have physically done it. Here's how she did physically do it. That would be correcting what the state believes to be a false narrative, but would also be totally inappropriate because it would be prejudicing Corey Richins in a material way. And you just can't do that. Is this interview possibly tainting the jury pool? Possibly. Usually it's harder for defense attorneys to taint the jury pool than it is prosecutors, but I think it could be something that a judge would look at and have to look at the rule and say, is this something that was appropriate to just respond to prejudicial publicity? Azam, Peter, anything a defendant says can be used against them, right? Yes. How about what their attorney says? Can the state use any of these against them? No, they wouldn't be able to say, like, if Corey Richins took the stand and impeaching her as if these were her own words. So it doesn't go that far. They can't argue that to a jury that Corey Richins said X, Y, and Z. That's not how this works in the criminal court system.
Now, we'll see what happens in the courtroom, but that, in our view, is something that they should have corrected.
Can you confirm then that the fentanyl was administered in the Moscow Mule, given what you just said about the lead detective O'Driscoll?
Obviously not. Can you confirm it was given in the Moscow? No, she just said that.
He couldn't confirm it, correct?
We cannot confirm what their theory is. We believe Ms. Richins is innocent. And, we're not here to convince you or anyone else that she's innocent other than those 8 people that are in the box at the trial. Those are the people we need to convince that she's innocent. So
they're going to go with we can convince them she's innocent, which again, as we know, you don't have to do that to win a criminal case. You do not have to prove that somebody is innocent, but that they're not guilty. Either the state didn't prove it, or of course that they are factually innocent. They are deciding to go with she is innocent. Okay. Laura said, do they have to give them their theory before openings? Not necessarily. They have to prove how he died and that she did it. They don't necessarily have to say specifically, it was in the Moscow Mule or it was in the dinner. My guess is they do have some kind of theory that they are going to prove exactly how it was Corey Richins who committed this crime. Because if they just say like fentanyl in his system, his wife hated him, or his wife had motive, I don't think that's going to be enough. I think you have to actually show how did she commit this crime? Not just why did she commit this crime? Because like we've said in the past, lots of people can have motives. Lots of people can have motives. That's why you don't have to prove motive. Sometimes it can be difficult and it frustrates people when there's no motive for a crime, which I get that. But you do have to prove that the crime was actually committed by the defendant. And they're going to have some theory as to how she ended Mr. Richins' life. They have to prove that she actually did it, that she was responsible, not just that maybe she was going to get some money, maybe they were going to get divorced, maybe he started to suspect she was trying to do something. Just that motive is not going to be enough.
that's not why I'm sitting here, but we do want what is accurate to be out there. A lot of it will come out at trial, but there are certain things that are out there that we know right now, sitting here today, just aren't accurate. And the Moscow Mule appears to be one of them. Now, since they have not ever said to us exactly what they think their theory is, I suppose we could be surprised at trial and they'll say, oh, it was the Moscow Mule after all. But they have never stated that in court ever, or in any pleadings or in any way.
The prosecution has painted your client as the Moscow Mule murderer. What is your opinion on that?
The Moscow Mule has never been stated in open court as being used to cause someone's death. I'm not sure where the press came up with that, but the lead detective has testified under oath that as of now, he does not know how fentanyl arrived in Mr. Richins' body. And
that could be a really good defense. That can be something that's really good to be cross-examined on, to really show, like, do we know Corey Richins did this? Because again, possibilities versus probabilities. Had he ever taken drugs before? I know we talked about gummies, and is there any other way that fentanyl could have gotten his system that's reasonable? Like, those are all really good questions and really good defenses.
the press claiming that there's a murder weapon, that this was it, is just wholly fanciful. It just didn't happen, and it's not ever been said by the prosecution in this case, and it's never been in a pleading in this case, and it's just inaccurate.
Second, was Corey in financial distress because of her real estate business? Prosecutors have said at the time of Eric Richins' death, Kay Richins Realty owed hard money lenders more than $1.8 million.
Kathy, before this, was your client solvent?
So that's one of the issues we felt compelled to speak to the press about. There has been quite a bit of reporting about my client's financial situation.
Reporting, okay, number one. Number two, words like solvent and financial situation. I don't think a judge is going to come down hard on these defense attorneys for this interview. Personally, maybe he will. This judge has opinions on things like this, but and I believe, is this the case that's not actually live streamed, but they record the hearings and then they play them later? I feel like this could affect cameras in the courtroom, but when you talk about financial situation and solvency and things like that, people have different definitions. And people also have different levels of greed they have different levels of panic. It's kind of like people that drive while the tank's on empty. They're like, oh, I can still get there. I'm fine. And most people like myself, a normal, sane person, will fill up when you're at about a quarter of a tank. Once it gets under a quarter of a tank, you fill it up. Or in my case, a quarter of a charge, I charge it up. I don't like to wait till the last minute. But some people, it's like, I live one paycheck behind, and they're fine with it. And they're like, I'm fine. I know I'm going to get paid next week. I'll be fine to play this. And other people save, and don't spend any of their money, whatever it may be. Everybody may look differently at her financial situation. So to say that the financial situation is totally being misrepresented to the public, to me, misses the boat on how's the jury going to look at this. And if somebody wants, they're going to talk about, how much money she actually did life insurance policies for. Well, some people would kill for $100,000. Some people wouldn't kill for $10 million. What was the Adelson dollar amount? Like one of them got like $35,000 or something. Most people would be like, that's a crazy low amount of money to do something so horrible. Some people, of course, there's no amount of money in the world to do something like that. So everybody looks at money differently. And to say that this is all, totally wrong and inaccurate and prosecutors need to come out and correct this, some of that I do think is a little bit of an overreach.
And the concern that we have is that the reports that have come out about her business, the solvency of her business, utterly failed to take into consideration a huge piece of property that she obtained 2 days after her husband passed away.
And like, to me, that's even a weird argument, because we've read into that a little bit both ways. And I could see that argued as like, that was a horrible decision, or it was a really good decision, or looking back on it now, it looks a lot better than it did at the time. Because maybe they'll say, like, at the time, it looked like she overpaid. But if you look at it now, oh, it was a really great investment. She would have been fine. But all of that, to me, again, is just like arguments you're going to make in court. That's really what those come down to me. Could this peek behind the defense's curtain help the prosecution's strategy? It can. Usually prosecutors are very, very aware of the weaknesses in their case. And good defense attorneys are going to attack the weaknesses, obviously. Kat, welcome to 38, Peter. I feel great. I feel 38, feeling great. Sorry, a day late. You're so loved by all of us, and you have gone above and beyond making this world a better place. Thank you, Kat, so much. Yesterday's Q&A stream was one of my favorites ever. I got to do it more often. There were so many good questions I couldn't get to. I absolutely loved it. I appreciate everybody that was able to come and hang out. But I really, really, really appreciate that. And DB says, nobody buys a huge property in the 3 days. It was already in motion. Correct. And here's what else I'll tell you. If, just as being a lawyer, right, and trying to look at different ways to argue different things, if this really was such a great financial decision, and there comes evidence that Eric Richins wanted to block it, and Corey Richins really didn't want to, and that puts more money potentially as a reason why she might want to do this, you're just seeing how in all these different things, you can argue both sides of them. And when you can argue both sides of them, it's not necessarily as clear, black and white, as they may be making it feel.
That's removed from all of the state's calculations. So the equity in that house alone, the value of that one piece of property was enough to cover any debt that she had in her business.
The day she bought it, the value of that company was able to cover any debt that she had, as if you don't have debt when you buy a mansion. It's very confusing. I don't like this part of it at all. As if they are coming out here correcting a false narrative. I don't like it. I think what they're showing us is they have an argument, which is good. As defense attorneys, you need to have an argument. And when they start throwing out that she had no money and she was going bankrupt, it's like, oh, contraire, look at this piece of property and how much value it had. Fine, that's a good argument. That is a good argument. But I just don't like the way it's presented here personally.
And we just feel that that is improper reporting, that it's that arbitrarily cutting off what condition her business was in prior to her husband's death without taking that into consideration is misleading. Furthermore, all of the reporting that is done only focuses on what we call debt service, not the actual value of the property she held. So that's completely being kept out. So it would be like if they said, you know, Ms. Halloran, what is your net worth? And you left out your house. I mean, that's a piece of property is an asset and it has value, and that's never taken into consideration.
Yeah, but sometimes it can be a negative asset, number one, meaning you overpaid for your house and a year later it's worth less. Now it hurts your net worth. So there's all sorts of different things. And like 3 days after his death, it's hard to really tell how much extra value added. Like for the most part, that would just be a net even. You owe on the house what the house is worth, minus what you put down and things like that. But then you don't have that money anymore. So I just, there's a lot of different ways to look at this.
And so we believe that that has also been misreported, and that's something we felt ethically compelled to come forward and correct.
Third, life insurance.
Well, another one that's out there's false is that she took out hundreds of thousands of dollars in life insurance on him shortly before he died. That's not true. She took out one policy that came in the mail, and it was one of those mailers we all get from our credit union saying, sign here for $100,000 free life insurance. Sign here for yourself, sign here for your spouse. You can get $100,000 free life insurance. That was sent in. She sent that in about a month before he died, 4 or 5 weeks before he died. All the rest of his life insurance, and he had a lot of life insurance, was all taken out by him long before that. And he knew of all the life insurance policies that were out on him. And we don't know if he knew of that last one. But in terms of
So here's another, argument, which again, I think it's definitely better if some people will roll their eyes at this because it's not hundreds of thousands of dollars life insurance. It's just $100,000. $100,000 is a lot for somebody, and they may feel like that's worth doing all this over. Some people obviously would not. Number two, maybe Corey Richins, there could be an argument that Corey Richins maybe started to sniff that she wasn't going to be the beneficiary anymore. And so she had to get one that she knew she was going to be the beneficiary of. The point being, there are arguments on both sides of all of this. I think it's really good that this defense team has arguments for a lot of the state's points of what the motive is, the greed, the life insurance, the fact that maybe she needed money right away. I think it's really, really good. And it does make me even more intrigued in the trial to see how these lawyers are going to present it to a jury and what does the evidence actually bear out. But in their response to the negative publicity, they're really taking this opportunity to get a lot of what they think and what they believe the evidence shows out there. And tell me in the chat, is this changing the way you look at this case? Because I think that was probably one of the goals here. How is this different? Al Dente said, how is this different from Morrissey did in his hostage video saying the McAlberts didn't do it? So to me, when a prosecutor comes and says some things, it's a lot different. Number two, they're saying they're responding specifically to what the prosecutors are saying and the public reports are, and that they have to come and correct the public reports. Morrissey is coming as the elected DA, and there are different rules for DAs and defense attorneys, and coming out and basically saying, we got the person and she's guilty. And by saying the McAlberts didn't do it, he's basically doubling down on the fact that saying that person is guilty, which is exactly what is the biggest no-no you can't do as a prosecutor publicly. And the way that he did it, obviously. Shelby said, I got my car measured at 27 miles after zero. Whew. Can't live in life on the edge there.
her taking out a life insurance policy on him, that's the only one, $100,000. So their motive, according to the state, is, oh, she took out life insurance, she was going to cash in on all this money. And again, that's not accurate. I mean, she took out an extra $100,000, which may seem like a lot to a lot of people, and it is a lot, but to this family, the other life insurance was well in excess of that last $100,000. And that amount of money for this family was not really all that much.
Does the prosecution have an ethical obligation to correct these things that are out in the narrative?
Again, I think if what they want is justice to be served, they have an obligation to do that.
I just disagree that they have the obligation to go out. And now if it was somebody saying that, you know, Corey also hurt her kids or something like that, like she was also giving them fentanyl. If somebody came out and said something like that and you want to come out and correct it, then I understand coming out from that perspective. But for people, especially in today's day and age, right, with the true crime phase and everybody being a sleuth and everybody being a lawyer and everybody being a detective and everybody having their theories, there's a lot of danger in that. And we've talked about that. And that's why we try to avoid as much of it. I think what you can say as prosecutors and what you should say as prosecutors, I feel like the judge has said this as well, is People are going to say a lot of things about this case. We have to make sure that what comes out in this courtroom is true and is only said in good faith. And we hope that people only report on and stick to the facts we say here, but we're not going to be able to control what everybody says about every situation. Just think if this applied to every other case. If a prosecutor had to come out and correct every narrative that they felt was false. And again, exactly what I said about the Morrissey video is exactly what I would warn this prosecutor against, that by coming out and correcting these false narratives, if you say that you're correcting this false narrative, but something else you said says Corey Richins is guilty publicly, and you say that as the prosecutor, I'm going to hammer you, right? On this show, we're going to talk about how you better not be doing that as a prosecutor. And that's the danger. And that's what you have to be really, really careful about. Really careful about.
Of course, their real obligation is in the courtroom, and we'll just have to see what happens then.
And the final point, the Google searches regarding how much fentanyl it would take to kill someone.
There are a number of things. You talked about the Moscow Mule, which, we believe is not their theory. They've never said it was their theory. And I think the facts that come out in trial will make it very obvious that that isn't even a possibility.
If the facts that come out of trial are going to make it very clear that's not even a possibility that it happened in the Moscow Mule, how do you know? What is their theory then? How did she do it? Do they know? Is there some other reason? Are they going to talk about the gummies or whatever, something else? I don't know. Zezelak said, really appreciate your videos, especially today. It's my 3rd anniversary of the surgery that caused CRPS, and I needed the distraction. Well, Zezelak, unfortunately, so many of us are familiar now with CRPS after a lot of what's happened in the world and cases that we've covered and things that we've heard. So I am glad that you're getting to hang out, take your mind off of that, think about something new, learn something new, interact with these great people here in the chat, and it's awesome to have you here to discuss it with us.
But one thing that's been reported on that they have let go, have not corrected, is that Ms. Richins Googled how much fentanyl does it take to kill someone. And that's been in the press, and it's been extracted.
Notice she said that they put it out there and let it be that she Googled this, which I think she's going to say is actually true, that she Googled that, but she Googled it after the death, not before, which I think is obviously a very important distinction. But if every time the state says it, they say it the right way, where is the line? I guess that's the question I have for you guys, because I feel like I know where it is, but where is the line on what the state has to come out and correct every time somebody says? I think being clear and honest in the facts, if they want to put the pressure on the prosecutor to do that, I'm all for that. When you talk about things and you discuss things in open court as a prosecutor, you have to know people are going to be hanging on your every word. So make sure what you say is correct. Bad for the engine to drive on empty. Just saying. Fair. Isn't this what trial is for? So you would think so, yes, but they are trying to get out ahead of it a little bit, and I think try to change the narrative publicly, which frankly, I don't mind. I do think publicly the nation is against Corey Richins and basically thinks that she did it. And I don't think any criminal defendant should start off a trial in that posture. So I hope this at least will open some people's minds. Based on the chat, I don't think it's doing that. Happy birthday. I know late to the game, but better late than never. Keep going. We will celebrate with you when you hit 1 million. Might be a long time for that until then, if it ever happens. But thank you. I'm glad you're here. Glad everybody's here. Thank you guys for the kind words and continuing to encourage. You guys are such an encouragement. I appreciate that.
Extrapolated from that she Googled that before Eric Richins' death. And that's just not the case. We've discovered through court records, through exhibits, that she Googled how much fentanyl does it take to kill someone a day or two after she was told he died of a fentanyl poisoning. If I was going to do this, I probably would be like very precise on the exact times and dates if I'm going to come out and say this stuff publicly. But I do think that makes a huge difference. If you Google it before, like, holy crap, is that damning?
or if you Google it like while it's happening, like it seems like maybe Brian Walsh was Googling some stuff while it was happening, that's going to be bad for him. If you do it after, when you find out that fentanyl is the reason for the death, that's completely logical, completely normal. And I think they'll have great arguments as to why that's not motive or damning or consciousness of guilt at all.
Fentanyl poisoning, not before, which makes perfect sense. She doesn't know how her husband died. She's told your husband died of fentanyl poisoning. And she's looking, what does this mean? How much fentanyl would someone have to take to die of fentanyl poisoning? That's a very, very different.
They better be right about this, right? It's another thing I was thinking of is they better be right about this. Interesting, like camera work here, right? Like looking right into the lights in our eyes and like all the bags in the background. I was thinking about that so much. I don't know, it must be my ADD, but like a lot going on.
Narrative than to leave it out there that, oh, the Moscow Mule murderer Googled how much fentanyl does it take to kill someone. No, that's not what happened.
John said, how much does it take? I have literally no clue, John, to be honest with you. Sonia, hi, Peter. I came on late to this. Maybe this was already asked. Will these interviews not affect their case negatively? It could. It's kind of a risk you take when doing things like this. Aaron, lawyer, I know you're a Florida lawyer and may not want to comment on this, but did you see or hear anything about Florida v. Tina trial? If so, any opinions on the fireworks between the judge and the prosecutor? I think I've seen some questions about it, but I have not actually seen clips or watched the trial myself, so I don't have any comment on it right now. Carmen, why do they bother that the information in the media are false? I don't know specifically what you mean by this question, but one thing that Kohberger's team didn't want to do was come out and make a statement like this and repeat all of the negative facts that were misreported into the media, because once you hear these things, like we're now hearing she Googled how much fentanyl, we're now hearing Moscow Mule killer, we're now hearing that she did take out a life insurance policy. Is that actually going to poison a jury pool? Or are they just going to remember what they want to remember, all the bad things that they're repeating here, even though they are explaining them away or giving them context? That's a danger to this as well. Kelly, this is my first super chat to say happy belated birthday. I turned 47 a week from today. You're only as old as you feel. I feel great. Played pickleball this morning. It was amazing. Absolutely love it. Want to play every day. I'm feeling great. Feeling 38. 38's a great age. I'm excited about it.
Thing that's also been different in this case for the attorneys is how the prosecution is handling it.
The language that the prosecution uses in its filings, do you feel at any point that they have crossed the line?
Yes, this has been interesting.
There's so much more to that, right? Because there's this like whole other story that John sent me an article on with stuff going on in New York where the prosecutors, maybe they are, feeling different about Corey Richins. Maybe they are trying to make an example out of her. Maybe they do have some kind of personal vendetta. There seems to be some smoke around that with some of the language they use and what they're doing about this. So there's a lot going on kind of in the background of this question, but we'll just listen to the lawyer's answer.
Not seen the personal language in filings typically in court that we're seeing here. The prosecution,
I would agree with that,
does seem to have a very strong opinion on this case. Not just, here's the evidence. They seem to have a personal opinion, which I think is reflected in their pleadings and has been reported on, some more than others. The poppycock memo was one that got reported on, which is surprising and unusual to see language like that in legal pleadings. So we've been uncomfortable with that. I see the prosecutor's job, like I said, is to fight for justice. It's not personal. It's not personal for them, and it shouldn't be personal for us either. We're all there doing our job. We're there to protect our client's rights. We're there to make sure our client gets a fair trial. They're there to serve justice. And what they think is justice and what we think is justice is very often the opposite. But it begins to get personal sometimes, I think, when it's a case that it is high profile. There is a lot to it. They've been working on it a very long time. And, I can see that sometimes you can't help but get personal. Sometimes we can't help but feel personally upset about our clients. It's hard. It's a job, but it's hard. Some prosecutors are better than others at not making it personal. It's just been my observation, and Maybe I'll be proven wrong at some point in the future, but this has become quite personal for them.
So why did the defense attorneys come to Two News Investigates? Why now? Why not just correct the record at trial?
Look, I never thought I would be sitting here. I don't think I should need to talk to the media. I really believe that I should be able to get a fair trial. But the way that this case has gone, I don't think we can do that. We have to make sure that when we step in there in February, that we have leveled the playing field. And we can't just hope for that.
Is that why you came to me?
That's exactly why we came here. And really, it's an ethical duty. There's a rules of professional conduct that says if we think that there are facts out there that have been laid out in such a way that we think goes against our client's best interest, that we have a duty to come out. I think some defense attorneys do hide behind, hey, I'm just not going to speak, no comment. And I think that's fair.
It's not really like hiding behind it. It's really weighing what is appropriate and what is ethical and what is best for your client and your case, right? And sometimes you really can't. I mean, most defense attorneys would love to talk in most cases, maybe not every case, like when it's really, really bad. But in most cases, defense attorneys have something they'd like to say, but they think better not.
I do it a lot, but this is different.
Because we don't get an opportunity
Yeah, he's a defense attorney too. All three of them are defense attorneys for Corey Richins.
To argue the facts until we're in front of a jury. The judge decides the law, a jury decides the facts. And what's in the narrative right now and in the public media is facts. So we won't have that opportunity until we're at trial and the jury is sitting in the box. And like I said, our concern is, can she get a fair trial when all of this is out there before we ever get an opportunity to show our side of the story and to show what we believe really happened in this case.
What do you believe happened in this case?
We believe that she's innocent, and the rest will come out during the trial. Because like I said, it's the people in the box that we need to convince, not the viewers, not anyone else. We just want to make sure that people don't come into that trial believing things that are absolutely false. We don't want to spend the time in the trial convincing people that what they've already heard is wrong. We want to spend our time, presenting our case without having to go back and argue against what's in the media.
Is the prosecution in this case injecting a false narrative to the media?
I don't know if they're necessarily injecting it, but they're certainly not correcting it. And I think that's why we're here today, is we honestly feel that we have an ethical duty when we have a client who is facing such serious charges and there is misinformation out there and it is not being corrected. It's a disservice to justice.
With that said, then how critical should the public be with this narrative? Or is the public just taking the prosecution's statements and narratives at face value because it's the prosecution, it's the state of...
So the reporter here keeps saying the prosecutor is saying this, the prosecutor's statements, but the defense attorneys haven't been that precise with the connections. So that was some of the confusion there, right? That's some of the confusion there. And how far a prosecutor can go correcting narratives, we've already been over that.
Utah.
I think that's part of it. I think also it's easy because of the headlines to just go along with it. And when somebody who we trust, right, the county attorneys throughout this state, the district attorneys, we trust that they're going to make the right choices when they charge. But also, it doesn't end there. It's also through the prosecution of a case. And with such a high-profile case, I think the public needs to be even more critical. Because if what's going on in this case goes on to a lesser degree in other cases that don't get the exposure, that don't have the appropriate resources, that's when our country starts to become in danger.
And if I may ask you,
So yeah, of course, if it's happening in this case, it's probably happening in other cases. We have to be really careful. I just haven't seen enough of a connection to the prosecutor said this specifically. Let's take a look at a filing. Let's take a look at a court hearing where they said this, and that's just dead wrong. Because if a prosecutor comes out and says something that's dead wrong, then you can correct the record about what you said. And that was wrong. I shouldn't have. I apologize. We're going to wait till trial, etc. But, what the media reports and coming out and correcting media reports is just, it sucks that the media gets it wrong. It sucks that reports are wrong. It sucks that people run with it. It sucks that people get convicted in the court of public opinion before a trial happens. but a prosecutor just can't possibly be doing that in every high profile case.
This, I'm not sure if you will answer.
They can't police the media. Because again, a lot of this can be media saying, oh, well, fentanyl, Moscow Mule, she said Moscow Mule, this definitely happened in the Moscow Mule. Or they could say things like, oh, she wrote this children's book about it. What a horrible person. She wanted the money. She hated him. He was going to divorce her. She obviously did it. Sometimes that's all it takes for some people to say she obviously did it, and they run wild with it. And that's the headline and that's the conversation. It sucks, but that's the reality of the world we live in, which is why it's so hard sometimes to pick a good jury, because you need a jury that's going to sit there and say, I'm going to wait and listen to all the evidence before I make my decision. And there's also multiple ways to kind of see the same fact.
But has the Summit County Attorney's Office vilified your client?
It's not their job to either vilify or create or make them insane, but it is their job to stick with the facts. And that's something that they have not done in this case, especially with how it's been portrayed in the media. So
I would say all lawyers are bound to stick to the facts, but when you have these motion hearings, it's not just going to be the facts. It's going to be arguments. It's going to be what might come out of trial. It's going to be what discovery we need for reason X, Y, and Z. It's going to be, Judge, we may argue this. This might be our theory of the case. We need to talk to this person. And more than just the specific facts comes out in hearings. So maybe they want cameras out of the courtroom. I don't know. Maybe that is something they're angling for with this, but you usually can't use cameras to get rid of cameras. I don't know. This is interesting. This is interesting.
Their goal is justice. They have not lived up to it, at least in this case.
Why reach out to 2 News Investigates?
I don't know. I mean, we have a lot of confidence in you, and we're hoping that you can get the word out, and that it's kind of the one pebble in a pond, right? That once you throw a pebble in, and the waves spread out. And we're hoping that once we correct it in one place that's credible, that's a well-known news source, that maybe the other news sources will also start to question a little more about what they're hearing and what they're covering, just so that the importance is that the facts that are reported accurately. And we really appreciate the opportunity to come forward and correct what we think has gotten out there incorrectly.
So Rainy Day said, Peter, I feel like you're blurring the lines between the rules of conduct for prosecutors and defense attorneys. This is my answer to this question. Every single attorney. Now, there are different variances in the rules from state to state, and there's a federal rule, but generally, lawyers that are active in a case are prohibited from making extrajudicial statements, meaning statements outside of the courtroom that they know or should know have a reasonable likelihood or a substantial likelihood of materially prejudicing a court proceeding. So coming out here, putting out all your defenses, arguing that everything that the prosecutor says is wrong, showing evidence to try and prove to the media that your client is innocent, and making arguments that the prosecutor is lying and they don't know X, Y, and Z, and they haven't turned over X, Y, and Z. Those could all be, I'm not saying that's what they're doing here, but some of it is absolutely prohibited from defense attorneys, from civil plaintiffs attorneys, from civil defense attorneys. There is some prohibition on what you can do publicly about a case. Now, when it's permitted is to counter negative publicity about your client, things that other people said about your client, that you want to correct the record or set the record straight because it's going too far. And I think all of this does feel like it falls within there. I think this falls within the rules of professional responsibility. I do not think they're breaking the rules of professional responsibility as I look at it and listen and analyze it myself, right? Now, I'd have to look at specifically the Utah rule and break it down to see if I see anything in there, but I do see it as a bigger problem if the prosecutor were to come and respond to this and in a way say that Corey Richins is guilty. Like, that would be a problem to me. That would be taking it too far.
Hear these false narratives and you know who you believe to be the truth.
It's gotten out there incorrectly.
When you hear these false narratives and you know who you believe to be the truth.
It's extremely frustrating. I think being a defense attorney, being a judge, a bailiff, it feels routine. You possibly in your job when you're doing things feel routine, but you're doing so much in your job that means something. And it's no different in the courts. We walk in, we joke around, we know everybody. At the end of the day, though, we're doing something very special in there, every single hearing, and especially when we're in trial. And what we're doing is we're upholding the Constitution. And that's a very high bar. And I feel that when I see these narratives come out, it becomes a game. It becomes another line. And we forget that there's somebody on the end of that. And that's a client. That's a human. That's a mother. And it does really frustrate me.
Is Corey aware of these narratives, and how does she handle what you claim is misinformation?
So I agree with him, obviously, right? These clients are human beings. They're people. They deserve truth, justice, fairness. Janice said, do you think they're trying to use this for a change of venue motion? Usually something like this hurts a change of venue motion because you are putting the eyes on it yourself. You are repeating these facts. You're out there taking part in this public conversation, and you can't cause your own change of venue. Now, they can say it got so bad, it went so far, we had to do this, but it was already bad before that. There could still be a motion, but if I was the prosecutor, I would mention this interview in my response to their change of venue motion. Jen, what was the determination of keeping her behind bars before the trial? Not a flight risk with her young kids, not like Donna. I can't remember. I know we broke down the video. I think danger to the community was one. I think seriousness of the crime, obviously, and evidence against her that there, in the judge's mind, was a lot of evidence against her that she did commit a serious and dangerous crime. I think that was a big part of it. I can't remember the specifics of it. I did a video on it if we want to go back and watch that specifically. All right, so now they ask, what is Corey's response to the negative press?
She is distraught. She is heartbroken. This has been very, very difficult for Ms. Richins. She's been in jail now for over 2 years on these charges and doesn't have an opportunity to really tell her story until we're in trial. So yes, it's been very difficult on her.
I asked Summit County Attorney Margaret Olson and Chief Prosecutor Brad Bloodworth for an on-camera interview for this report. I received the following statement.
So she asked the prosecutor if they would come on as well, and here is the response.
Aware of the recent filings report. I received the following statement. We are aware of the recent filings submitted by the defense. We will address all matters related to this case through the legal process rather than in the media. Our formal response will be part of the public record next week.
So how about that? Their formal response will be part of the record. Next week, they're going to do this in court, not in the media. That's throwing a little shade at the defense attorneys. We'll see what the judge says. There might be some admonishment there, although I think they still have a good argument that this fits into the exception. We'll see if the judge agrees, right? We will see if the judge agrees. Is the date on this letter here? Let me see if the date's on this letter.
Received the following statement. We are aware of the recent filings submitted by the defense. We will address all matters related to this case through the legal process rather than in the media. Our formal response will be part of the public record next week. We ask that this comment be included in your report to ensure our position is accurately represented and the reporting remains balanced.
And they asked to make sure that this comment is in the reporting to make sure the reporting remains balanced. Very smart response by the prosecutor. And to me, if you're not going to go the media route, which I think is smart for the prosecutor not to do, this is exactly the way to do it. We're going to handle it in court. That's how we think the appropriate way to handle it is. And please make sure you put it in there so you don't just say, and there was no comment by the prosecutor, which again makes them look bad if you say things like there was no comment by the prosecutor, right? Yeah, I don't think this judge is a big fan of the media and the cameras and things like that. That's it. All right. Beloved, belated happy birthday, Peter. I celebrated my 70th 1 week ago. Retired RN, learning so much from you doing this time. My husband says I should have been a lawyer. Thanks for all you do. May 38 be blessed. Thank you so much, beloved, and everybody else came on to hang out, talk about this case. Let me know if this interview changed your mind at all, if it had the effect that they probably wanted to, that made you at least more open-minded, maybe it doesn't think Corey Richins is innocent or the prosecutor's going to lose or anything like that. But what did it change, if anything, about the way you look at this case? All right, that's all we got. Hopefully you guys are subscribed. If you haven't, take a second now that the video is ending to subscribe. And of course, hit that like button before you leave. That's all we got. Till next time, peace. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who may be interested here on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe. You can also follow us on Instagram, X, Facebook, and TikTok. And don't forget to check out the Lawyer You Know podcast featuring new episodes every week. And if you have a case that you want to personally talk to us about in your life, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, truck accident, or slip and fall case, please email us at lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. And of course, all these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, The Lawyer You Know.